Useless old woman, I heard my daughter say as I recovered from heart surgery. I cried in silence. When I got better, I transferred the house to the only one who truly cared for me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Those words sliced through my heart more painfully than any scalpel ever could. I lay in my hospital bed, pretending to be asleep, as my daughter Celine spoke those words to her husband James. She thought I couldn't hear her, but I did. Every syllable burned into my soul. I'd just undergone heart surgery 3 days ago. Major heart surgery that I almost didn't make it to because no one in my family had time to take me to my doctor's appointments. No one except Tyson, our gardener, of 15 years. It started with chest pains. Nothing dramatic, just a tightness that wouldn't go away. When I mentioned it to Celine during our Sunday dinner, she barely looked up from her phone. "Mom, everyone gets aches and pains at your age," she said dismissively. "Take an aspirin and lie down." I did take an aspirin, but the pain persisted for weeks. When I called my son-in-law James to ask if he could drive me to the doctor, he told me he was swamped at work and suggested I call an Uber. "I don't know how to use those smartphone apps," I explained. He sighed heavily, that impatient sound I'd grown so familiar with. "Then call Celine." But Celine was busy too. She always was. Too busy for her mother, unless she needed something. It was Tyson, who noticed me clutching my chest while I watched him trim the roses one Tuesday morning. "Ms. Leona, you don't look well," he said, setting down his shears. "How long have you been having chest pains?" When I told him it had been almost a month, his face darkened with concern. "I'm taking you to the hospital right now," I protested. Weakly, not wanting to be a burden, but Tyson was insistent. "Your garden can wait, Ms. Leona. Your heart can't." At the emergency room, doctors discovered I had severe coronary artery blockage. I needed surgery immediately. The doctor looked at Tyson and asked if he was my son. "No," I answered. "He's my gardener." The word felt insufficient for the man who had potentially saved my life. When I called Celine from the hospital, her first response wasn't concern. It was inconvenience. "Mom, I have the charity gala tonight," she complained. "Can't they schedule the surgery for next week?" The surgeon, who was standing right beside me, shook his head and took the phone. "Ms. Celine, this is Dr. Patel. Your mother needs this surgery tomorrow morning. Without it, she might not make it to next week." Celine and James showed up the next morning, just minutes before they wheeled me into surgery. Celine was wearing full makeup and designer clothes, as if she'd come straight from a photo shoot rather than rushing to her mother's bedside. "We can't stay long," she informed me. "James has a meeting at 11. I nodded, too scared and hurt to argue. As they administered the anesthesia, I reached for Celine's hand, but she was already turning away, phone in hand. The surgery was successful, though more complicated than expected. I spent 2 days in intensive care before being moved to a regular room. That's when I discovered Tyson had been coming every day, bringing fresh flowers from my garden and sitting quietly while I slept. "You didn't have to do that," I told him, deeply touched. "The garden misses you, Ms. Leona," he said simply. "And I wanted to make sure you were okay." Celine and James visited briefly on the 3rd day. They didn't bring flowers or a card. Instead, Celine brought a stack of insurance papers that needed my signature. "The hospital billing department is being difficult," she complained. "They need these forms filled out immediately." As I struggled to sign with my shaky hand, I overheard Celine whispering to James near the door. "How long do you think she'll need care after this? We can't have her staying with us. I'm not playing nurse to a useless old woman." James's response was too quiet to hear, but Celine's dismissive laugh told me all I needed to know about his answer. Tears welled in my eyes as I stared at the ceiling, pretending I hadn't heard. 68 years old, and this is what I'd become to my only child, a burden, an inconvenience, a useless old woman. I thought about my life, the sacrifices I'd made. After Celine's father died when she was just 12, I'd worked 2 jobs to provide for her. I paid for her college education, her lavish wedding, and helped with the down payment on her house. I babysit my grandchildren whenever asked, even when it exhausted me. I'd given everything to my daughter, and in return she saw me as nothing but a nuisance. As I lay there, something hardened inside me, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. Perhaps it was the brush with mortality, or maybe it was finally hearing the unfiltered truth of how my daughter saw me. Either way, I knew things would never be the same. The tears dried on my face as a plan began to form in my mind. I owned my house outright, a beautiful colonial with a garden that had been my solace. After my husband died, it was worth over $1 million in today's market. Celine had always assumed it would be hers one day. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to reconsider what I owed to those who treated me with such callous disregard. When Tyson came back that evening with fresh daisies from my garden, I watched him arrange them carefully in the hospital vase. His hands, rough from years of outdoor work, moved with surprising gentleness. "Tyson," I said quietly, "I think I need to make some changes when I get home." He nodded, his kind eyes meeting mine. "Sometimes, Ms. Leona, that's exactly what a garden needs to thrive again." 2 weeks after my surgery, I sat on my back porch watching Tyson carefully prune the rose bushes. The doctor had advised me to rest, but sitting inside alone with my thoughts had become unbearable. Each day since returning home, memories flooded back. Not in gentle waves, but in painful torrents that left me gasping for breath. "Would you like some iced tea, Tyson?" I called out, needing the distraction of conversation. He set down his clippers and nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. It was mid-July, and the Virginia heat was merciless. As we sat together on the porch, I found myself speaking thoughts I'd kept locked away for years. You know, when Celine was accepted to Georgetown, I sold my wedding ring to help pay her first semester's tuition. Tyson looked up, surprised. "Your husband's ring?" "No, mine." I twisted the bare spot on my finger that still felt empty after all these years. Richard had been gone for 6 years by then. The insurance money was running out, and my teaching salary wasn't enough. I'd never told Celine where that money came from. She'd been too excited about her acceptance letter to notice that my ring was gone. "Did she ever find out?" Tyson asked quietly. I shook my head. I told her it was a special savings account Richard had set up before he died. The lie had come easily then, wrapped in my determination to give my daughter everything, even at my own expense. The memory triggered another, Celine's graduation day. I'd taken 3 buses to get to the ceremony because my car had broken down, arriving sweaty and disheveled just as they called her name. Later, she'd introduced me to her friends' parents with obvious embarrassment, quickly steering conversations away from my teaching job at the public school to focus on her father's former career as an investment banker. She was always ashamed. "Of me," I said aloud, surprised by my own candor. Even before Richard died, I wasn't sophisticated enough, didn't wear the right clothes, didn't have the right connections. Tyson nodded slowly. Some people spend their whole lives looking elsewhere for what's right in front of them. His simple wisdom struck a chord. How many times had Celine called me, not to check on my well-being, but to complain about her husband, or brag about a promotion, or, most commonly, to ask for money? There was the time she needed $15,000 for a kitchen renovation emergency that somehow coincided with her and James's trip to the Maldives. Or when my grandson Lucas needed specialized educational testing that insurance wouldn't cover. Testing, I later discovered, was actually an exclusive summer soccer camp in Europe. Each time, I'd given without question. Each time, Celine's gratitude lasted exactly as long as it took for the check to clear. Last Christmas, I found myself telling Tyson. I spent 3 weeks knitting a blanket for Celine. I couldn't afford the designer bag she wanted, but I thought something handmade would be special. I paused, the memory still raw. She opened it, forced a smile, and it was in the donation pile by New Year's. I saw it when I came to babysit. Tyson's face darkened. "That's not right, Ms. Leona." "No," I agreed. It wasn't. My phone buzzed with a text from Celine. "Need you to watch the kids this weekend. James and I have a couples retreat. Also, could you loan us $5,000? Kitchen renovation ran over budget." "No. How are you feeling?" "No. Is it too soon after your surgery?" Just another demand. I set the phone down without answering, something I'd never done before. "She only calls when she needs something," I said, my voice barely audible. "Money, babysitting, someone to complain to. But when I needed a ride to the doctor..." My voice broke. Tyson waited patiently as I composed myself. "When Richard was alive, things were different," I continued. "He came from money, and his family had connections. Celine adored him, followed him around like a shadow. After the cancer took him, she looked at me like I was a stranger who had invaded her home. I remembered the night I'd found 14-year-old Celine crying in her father's study, clutching his photo. "Why did Dad have to die?" she'd sobbed. "Why couldn't it have been you instead?" The words had cut deep, but I'd chalked it up to grief, pulling my resistant daughter into my arms and promising I'd take care of her forever. And I had kept that promise, hadn't I? Through the rebellious teenage years, the expensive college education, the elaborate wedding, the down payment on her house. Through every crisis and demand, I'd been there, offering whatever I could give: money, time, emotional support. I'd drained my retirement accounts, worked well past when I should have retired, all to ensure Celine had everything she needed. Yet here I was, 68 years old, recovering from heart surgery, and my daughter couldn't spare 10 minutes to drive me to a doctor's appointment. "Do you know what hurts the most, Tyson?" I said, finally giving voice to the thought that had been haunting me since the hospital. "It's not that she called me useless. It's that I've spent my entire life trying to be useful to her, and it made no difference at all." Tyson sat down, his glass, and looked me directly in the eyes. "Ms. Leona, may I speak plainly?" I nodded, taken aback by his serious tone. "You deserve better," he said simply. "You've given everything to someone who only takes. That's not love. That's not family." His words hung in the air between us, both painful and liberating. For decades, I'd told myself that motherhood was about sacrifice, that Celine's happiness was worth any price. But what about my happiness? What about my worth beyond what I could provide for others? The phone buzzed again. Another text from Celine. "Mom? Did you see my message? We really need an answer about this weekend." A familiar anxiety crept in. The fear of disappointing her, of causing conflict, of being even more alone than I already was. But something had changed inside me. The woman who had always said yes, who had always put herself last, was beginning to fade away. "You know," I said slowly, "Tyson, I think my heart surgery fixed more than just my arteries." He raised an eyebrow questioningly. "It's making me see things more clearly," I explained, "and I don't like what I'm seeing." As the afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows across my garden, I made a decision. It was time to reclaim what was left of my life. It was time to recognize who truly cared about my well-being. And it certainly wasn't my daughter. As summer turned to fall, my physical strength gradually returned, but something else was healing too: my sense of self-worth. I began to look forward to Tyson's visits, not just for the garden work he did, but for our conversations. One crisp October morning, I brought coffee out to the garden where Tyson was planting bulbs for spring. Daffodils and tulips, he explained, gesturing to the carefully arranged holes in the soil. They need to sleep through winter before they can bloom. Like some truths, I said, surprising myself with the philosophical turn. Tyson looked up, a curious expression on his weathered face. You've been doing a lot of thinking since your surgery, Ms. Leona. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. When you nearly die, it makes you reconsider what you're living for. He nodded, returning to his work with careful precision. I watched, his hands strong, calloused, yet gentle with the delicate bulbs. Tyson? I asked suddenly. Why did you become a gardener? He paused, sitting back on his heels. For a moment I thought he might deflect the question. Tyson had always been private about his personal life during the 15 years he'd tended my garden. I used to be a nurse, he said finally. Of all the answers I'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. A nurse? He nodded, returning to his planting. For 12 years, worked in the cardiac ward at Virginia Memorial. I tried to picture Tyson in scrubs, instead of his worn jeans and flannel shirts. What happened? He sighed, a sound that carried weight. My wife Elaine. She had multiple sclerosis, diagnosed when our daughter Maya was just 2. He patted soil around a bulb with particular care. The last few years, she needed full-time care. I couldn't work hospital shifts anymore. I'm so sorry, I said, suddenly ashamed of my ignorance. 15 years of employment, and I knew almost nothing about this man's life. Gardening gave me flexible hours, he continued. I could be there for Elaine, take Maya to her therapy appointments. Maya has special needs? He nodded. Autism spectrum. She's brilliant with numbers, but social situations are challenging for her. A proud smile crossed his face. She's 21 now, taking college classes online. And your wife? I asked gently, already suspecting the answer from his use of past tense. Passed 5 years ago. His hands never stopped working as he spoke, as if the rhythm of planting helped him tell the difficult parts of his story. Maya and I, we're making our way. I sat in silence, absorbing this new understanding of the man who had saved my life by taking me to the hospital. A former nurse who left his career to care for his family, who still, despite his own struggles, noticed when an old woman was in distress. You never mentioned any of this, I said finally. He shrugged. You never asked, Ms. Leona. The simple truth stung. How many times had I greeted him with perfunctory politeness before turning the conversation to what needed doing in the garden? How many Christmases had I handed him a bonus check with a generic card, never wondering how he spent the holidays or if he needed more? I've been a poor employer, I admitted. Tyson looked up, genuine surprise on his face. Not at all. You've been fair and respectful. That's more than many can say. But I never bothered to know you, I insisted. All these years, and I never knew about your nursing background, your wife, your daughter. He stood up, brushing soil from his hands. Ms. Leona, people reveal themselves when they're ready, when the soil is right for planting, so to speak. He gestured to the garden around us. Look at these chrysanthemums. They wait all year for fall to show their colors. Some revelations take time. I smiled at his gardening metaphor. Is that why you told me today? The soil is right? He considered this, his eyes thoughtful. Maybe it's because for the first time, you seem to be seeing the garden, not just the house it surrounds. The observation was profound in its simplicity. Had I been so focused on maintaining appearances, the perfect colonial home, the manicured lawn, the reputation as a generous mother, that I'd missed the beauty and truth growing right in front of me? Tell me about Maya, I said, genuinely, wanting to know. What's she studying? Tyson's face lit up in a way I'd never seen before. For the next hour, he told me about his daughter's passion for mathematics, her struggles with the social dynamics of high school, her dream of becoming a data analyst. He showed me photos on his phone, a lovely young woman with her father's thoughtful eyes and a serious expression. "She's had it tough," he said. "But she's the strongest person I know." "She has a good father," I observed. Tyson looked away, but not before I caught the emotion in his eyes. "I just try to do right by her. Some days are harder than others." "Do you live nearby?" I realized I had no idea where he went when he left my property. "Apartment complex on Maple Street," he said. "It's not much, but it's home." I knew the area, modest rentals mostly occupied by service workers and students from the community college. Nothing like the spacious comfort of my 4-bedroom house with its sprawling garden. "Maya likes the quiet there," he added. "Neighbors mostly keep to themselves." As we continued talking, I found myself sharing more about my own life, not just the disappointments with Celine, but memories of Richard, stories from my teaching days, dreams I'd set aside. Tyson listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly hearing me. When was the last time anyone had really listened to me like that? By the time he packed up his tools to leave, something had shifted between us. The employer-employee line had blurred into something approaching friendship. "Tyson," I called as he headed toward his truck. "Thank you." He turned, eyebrows raised questioningly. "For taking me to the hospital that day," I clarified. "But also for today, for talking with me." He nodded, a small smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Everyone deserves to be heard, Ms. Leona. Everyone." As I watched his truck disappear down the driveway, I thought about his words. Everyone deserves to be heard. Had I ever truly been heard by my own daughter? Had I ever truly heard Tyson before today? My phone chimed with a text from Celine. "Mom, can we borrow your good china for our dinner party next weekend?" No greeting, no inquiry about my health, just another request. For the first time, I saw the pattern with complete clarity, and I knew, with sudden certainty, that it was time for the soil of my life to nurture new growth. The Thanksgiving holiday approached with its usual flurry of expectations. In years past, I would have spent weeks preparing, cleaning every corner of the house, polishing silver that had been in Richard's family for generations, planning an elaborate menu to please Celine and James's sophisticated palates. This year I couldn't summon the energy. Or perhaps, more accurately, I couldn't summon the desire to perform the role of the perfect mother for people who didn't appreciate it. When Celine called to discuss Thanksgiving plans, her voice had that familiar demanding tone I now recognized. "All too well. Mom, we've invited the Hendersons this year. You remember James's boss? I told them about your cornbread stuffing. You'll need to make extra. No, how are you feeling? No, are you up to hosting after your surgery? Just instructions, expectations, demands." "Actually, Celine," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I'm not sure I'm up to hosting this year. The doctor says I need to avoid stress." The silence on the other end was profound. Then, "But we always have Thanksgiving at your house." "I know, but..." "Mom, the Hendersons are expecting it. James needs to make a good impression. You can't just cancel Thanksgiving." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pressure building, the guilt, the obligation, the fear of disappointing her. "I'm not canceling Thanksgiving," I clarified. "I'm just saying I can't host it this year." "Well, my kitchen is too small," she objected immediately. "And we've already sent out invitations with your address." Of course they had, without asking me first. "You sent invitations to my house without checking if I was well enough to host?" Celine's sigh was theatrical. "Mom, don't be dramatic. It's just dinner. You sit around most days anyway. What's the difference?" The casual cruelty of her words struck me like a physical blow. Just dinner. As if the days of preparation, the expense, the physical toll of cooking and cleaning meant nothing. You sit around most days anyway. As if my recovery from major heart surgery was some kind of vacation. The difference, I said carefully, is that I nearly died 2 months ago, Celine. My heart stopped on the operating table. Twice. Oh, here we go, she muttered, using your surgery to guilt-trip me again. I fell silent, too stunned to respond. Using my surgery to guilt-trip her? When had I ever done that? If anything, I'd downplayed my condition to avoid being a burden. Look, she continued, her voice taking on that falsely patient tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. If you're really not up to cooking, I can have it catered. You just need to clean the house and set the table. James will cover. The cost, consider it an early Christmas present. An early Christmas present. As if allowing me to not cook in my own home after major surgery was some kind of generous gift. Something snapped inside me, not with the dramatic flare of anger, but with the quiet finality of a thread that had been strained too long. No, I said. No what? No, I won't be hosting Thanksgiving. If you've already sent out invitations, you'll need to contact everyone and change the venue. Mom, Celine's voice rose in indignation. You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? A restaurant on Thanksgiving? That's not my problem, I said, surprising myself with my firmness. You made plans involving my home without consulting me. Now you need to make new plans. I don't believe this, she sputtered. After everything we've done for you, I cut her off. Something I'd never done before. What exactly have you done for me, Celine? Did you take me to my doctor's appointments? Did you visit me regularly in the hospital? Have you helped with my recovery in any way? The silence that followed was answer enough. I thought so, I said quietly. I'll be spending Thanksgiving with friends this year. You're welcome to join us, but I won't be hosting at my house. Friends? She sounded genuinely confused. What friends? The question stung, though it shouldn't have surprised me. In Celine's mind, I existed only in relation to her. Mother, babysitter, bank account. The idea that I might have relationships outside of our family seemed incomprehensible to her. Goodbye, Celine, I said, ending the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking as I set down the phone. I'd never stood up to my daughter like that before. The rush of anxiety was immediate. Had I gone too far? Would she forgive me? Was I ruining our relationship? But beneath the anxiety was something else, a sense of rightness, of boundaries finally established, of self-respect reclaimed. I made a cup of tea and carried it out to the back porch. The November air was crisp, but the afternoon sun provided enough warmth to make it pleasant. The garden was transitioning to its winter rest, but Tyson had left it neat and prepared for spring's eventual return. My phone rang again, Celine, no doubt, calling to continue the argument. I silenced it without looking. Instead, I pulled out a notebook and pen. If I was going to reclaim my life, I needed to be methodical about it. The teacher in me appreciated a good plan. At the top of the page, I wrote, "What do I want the rest of my life to look like?" The question was both terrifying and exhilarating. For so long, my life had revolved around others' needs and expectations, first Richard's, then Celine's. What did I want for myself? By the time I finished my tea, I had filled 3 pages with notes, ideas, and questions. Some were practical, review my will and financial situation. Others aspirational, take a painting class, volunteer at the library. But all were focused on my happiness and well-being for perhaps the first time in decades. The last item on my list gave me pause. Speak to a lawyer about my house and assets. The colonial home had been in Richard's family for generations. When he died, he left it to me without restrictions, much to his family's dismay. They had expected it to go to Celine, to stay in the bloodline, as his sister had tactlessly put it at the funeral. I had always assumed I would leave it to Celine when I died. It was what Richard would have wanted. It was what everyone expected. But now? Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I made an appointment with Patricia Wilson, a lawyer I'd met through my garden club. I told Tyson I had a doctor's appointment, which wasn't entirely untrue. I did have a checkup scheduled, just not until the following week. Patricia's office was warm and inviting, with none of the intimidating legal trappings I'd expected. She listened attentively as I explained my situation, taking occasional notes, but mostly just letting me talk. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Leona, you have every right to allocate your assets however you choose," she said. "Your house is yours to leave to whomever you want. But I have to ask, are you sure about this? Family situations are complex, and decisions made in moments of hurt can have long-lasting consequences." I appreciated her caution, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. "I've spent my entire life putting my daughter's needs before my own," I said. "I've given her everything she's ever asked for. But somewhere along the way, I became nothing more than a resource to her. A babysitter, a bank account, a holiday venue." I took a deep breath, saying aloud what I'd been thinking for weeks. I want my legacy to go to someone who sees me as a person, not a possession. Someone who values me for who I am, not what I can provide. Patricia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Then let's make sure your wishes are legally protected." As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The decision wasn't about punishing Celine. It was about honoring myself and recognizing the true meaning of family, not blood, but care, not obligation, but love. My phone had 6 missed calls from Celine. I didn't return them. December arrived with a blanket of snow that transformed my garden into a winter wonderland. Inside my home, another transformation was taking place, one less visible but far more significant. I had begun to set boundaries with Celine, small ones at first. I declined her request to babysit on short notice. I didn't answer her calls after 8 p.m. I said no to lending her money for what she called emergency car repairs. But Facebook revealed was a ski trip to Aspen. Each refusal was met with escalating tactics: guilt, anger, manipulation. "I guess your grandchildren just aren't a priority," she'd say when I couldn't babysit. Or, "I never thought my own mother would let me down like this when I wouldn't write a check." Words that once would have devastated me now bounced off a growing shield of self-respect. I wasn't being selfish. I was being sensible. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was establishing healthy boundaries. But Celine wasn't used to hearing no from me, and her behavior grew increasingly desperate. The week before Christmas, she showed up unannounced at my door, her expression a practiced mask of concern. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. "James and I are worried about you." I closed the door against the cold and followed her into the living room. "Worried about what exactly?" She made a show of looking around the house, as if searching for evidence. "You've been acting strange lately, distant, refusing to help with the kids, not returning our calls promptly." She turned to face me, her expression serious. "We're concerned you might be experiencing cognitive decline." The accusation was so unexpected, so calculated, that I actually laughed. "Cognitive decline? Because I've stopped doing everything you ask the moment you ask it?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "It's not funny, Mom. After your heart surgery, it would be perfectly normal to experience some changes. James and I were discussing it, and we think it might be time to consider assisted living. So that was their game. If they couldn't control me, they'd try to convince me I was incompetent." "My doctor says I'm recovering remarkably well," I replied calmly. "In fact, he says my health has improved significantly since I've been reducing stress in my life." Selena's facade of concern slipped a little. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm fine, Celine. Better than fine. I'm finally taking care of myself instead of everyone else." She stared at me, clearly thrown by my composure. This wasn't how our confrontations usually went. Typically, I would be apologizing by now, eager to smooth things over, to be the mother she wanted me to be. "This isn't like you," she said finally. "No," I agreed. "It's not like the me you're used to. But it is me, the real me, the one who's been buried, under years of trying to please everyone but herself." Celine's expression hardened. "Is this about Thanksgiving? Because if you're still upset about that—" "This isn't about any one incident," I interrupted gently. "It's about a pattern that's existed our entire relationship. I give, you take. I sacrifice, you expect. I need, you disappear." Her face flushed with anger. "That's not fair. I have my own life, my own family to worry about." "Yes, you do," I acknowledged. "And I have mine." "What's that supposed to mean?" Suspicion crept into her voice. "What family? It's just you, Mom." The casual dismissal stung, but it also confirmed what I already knew. In Celine's mind, I existed in isolation, with no identity outside of being her mother. "I have friends," I said simply. "I have people who care about me, who see me as more than just someone to provide for them." Celine scoffed. "The garden club ladies? Your book group? Those aren't real relationships, Mom." I thought about Tyson, about our conversations over tea in the garden, about how he'd noticed my chest pains when my own daughter hadn't, about how he'd driven me to every follow-up appointment without being asked, just because he cared. "You don't get to decide what's real for me, Celine," I said quietly. She stood up abruptly, frustration radiating from her. "Fine, be this way, but don't come crying to me when you're alone and need help." The irony of her statement, after I'd been alone in the hospital, alone during my recovery, alone for years emotionally even when physically surrounded by family, was almost too much. "I won't," I promised. After she left, slamming the door hard, enough to rattle the Christmas wreath, I sat in the quiet of my living room and realized something remarkable. I felt peaceful. Not guilty, not anxious, not desperate to call her back and apologize. Just calm. The transformation wasn't just in how I dealt with Celine. It was in every aspect of my life. I'd joined a water aerobics class for seniors at the community center. I'd volunteered to read to children at the library. I'd reconnected with old colleagues from my teaching days. And I'd developed a genuine friendship with Tyson. Our conversations had evolved beyond gardening and weather to books, music, politics, and personal philosophies. He'd invited me to attend Maya's winter concert at the community college, where she played violin in the orchestra despite her social anxiety. I'd sat next to Tyson, watching his face glow with pride as his daughter performed, and felt more like family in that moment than I had with Celine in years. The holidays passed quietly. Celine extended a perfunctory invitation to Christmas dinner at her house, which I politely declined, explaining I had other plans. I spent Christmas Eve at a community dinner for seniors, where I played the piano and led carols. Christmas Day, I joined Tyson and Maya for a simple but joyful meal in their apartment. Maya, initially shy and hesitant around me, had gradually warmed up when she discovered I could discuss mathematical concepts with her, a remnant of my years teaching high school. By the end of the evening, she was excitedly showing me her collection of vintage calculators, her eyes bright with an enthusiasm that reminded me of Tyson's when he talked about gardening. As January turned to February, the legal paperwork Patricia had prepared was finalized. My will had been updated, my assets allocated according to my wishes, not others' expectations. The process had been straightforward, but the emotions behind it were complex. I wasn't disinheriting Celine out of spite. I was making a conscious choice about my legacy, about who had earned a place in it through genuine care and connection. Celine continued her campaign of manipulation, alternating between angry accusations and brief periods of sweetness when she needed something. James called once, his tone patronizing as he suggested I was being influenced by unnamed others. "Your mother isn't herself," I overheard him telling Celine after I refused to co-sign a loan for their vacation home. "Maybe we should talk to her doctor." Their attempts to control me might have worked before my surgery, before I'd faced my mortality and recognized the emptiness of our relationship. Now, they simply reinforced that I'd made the right decision. On a snowy evening in late February, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, watching the garden through the window. Even buried under snow, I could see its structure, its potential, the promise of spring waiting beneath the surface. Tyson had been right that day in the hospital. Sometimes, that's exactly what a garden needs to thrive again: change. Pruning. Away what no longer serves, making space for new growth, recognizing that some plants will never flourish no matter how much you nurture them. My phone rang. Celine again. I let it go to voicemail, no longer feeling guilty for prioritizing my peace. Whatever crisis she was manufacturing this time could wait. I was done being the useful old woman. It was time to be Leona. Spring arrived with a burst of color in my garden. The daffodils and tulips Tyson had planted in the fall pushed through the soil, their vibrant blooms a testament to patience and proper care. I found myself spending more time outdoors, tending to the flowers alongside Tyson, learning from his expertise but also contributing my own ideas. "You've got a natural touch, Ms. Leona," he said one morning as we pruned the rose bushes together. "These plants respond to you." I smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm learning from the best." He shook his head modestly, but couldn't hide his pleased expression. Our friendship had deepened over the winter months, evolving into something that defied simple categorization. He was still my gardener, yes, but also my confidant, my teacher, and increasingly, part of what I now recognized as my chosen family. My relationship with Celine, meanwhile, had settled into a strained détente. After months of pushing against my new boundaries, she had grudgingly adapted to the reality that I was no longer at her beck and call. Our interactions were less frequent and more superficial, but also less fraught with manipulation and guilt. Had made peace with the distance between us. Some relationships, I'd learned, are healthier with firm boundaries. Some, sadly, never evolve beyond transactional exchanges. I would always love my daughter, but I no longer expected her to provide the emotional connection I'd yearned for all these years. As April turned to May, I decided it was time. My health had stabilized, my mind was clear, and my resolve was firm. "Tyson," I said one afternoon as we sat on the porch after a day of gardening, "would you and Maya be able to come to dinner this Friday? There's something important I'd like to discuss with both of you." He looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Ms. Leona. Is everything all right?" "More than all right," I assured him. "It's just time for some things to be said out loud." That Friday evening, I prepared a special meal: roast chicken with herbs from the garden, fresh vegetables, and a homemade apple pie for dessert. I set the dining room table with care, using the good china that Celine had always coveted. When Tyson and Maya arrived, both dressed a little more formally than usual, I felt a surge of affection for them. Maya had brought a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself, a gesture so thoughtful it brought tears to my eyes. "These are beautiful," I said, accepting them warmly. "Thank you, Maya." She smiled, making brief eye contact before looking away, a significant effort for her. "Dad said you like purple flowers best." I glanced at Tyson, touched that he'd remembered such a small detail. "I do." Dinner was a relaxed affair, filled with easy conversation. Maya, normally reserved, enthusiastically described a mathematical concept she was studying, her hands gesturing animatedly. Tyson shared amusing stories about particularly challenging gardens he'd worked on over the years. I found myself thinking how natural it felt, The three of us sharing a meal in this home that had so often felt too large, too empty. After dessert, I invited them into the living room, where I'd prepared coffee and a folder containing the documents I needed. "I have something important to tell you both," I began, once we were settled. "Something I've given a lot of thought to." Tyson's expression turned serious. "Ms. Leona, if this is about your health—" No, I assured him quickly. "My health is fine. Better than it's been in years, actually." I took a deep breath. "This is about my house, about what happens to it after I'm gone." Maya shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to her father. Conversations about mortality were difficult for her literal mind to process. "I've updated my will," I continued gently, "and I've made some decisions that might surprise you." From the folder, I withdrew a document and handed it to Tyson. He took it with a puzzled expression that quickly transformed to shock as he read the contents. "Ms. Leona," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this says that I'm leaving this house to you and Maya." I finished for him. "Yes." Maya looked between us, trying to understand. "The house? This house?" I nodded. "This house, the garden, and a trust to maintain them both." Tyson's hands were trembling. "I don't understand. Why would you—" "Because you are the ones who truly care for it," I said simply. "And for me." I explained how the heart surgery had been a wake-up call, forcing me to evaluate who had been there when I truly needed help. How I'd realized that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, respect, and mutual care. When I was at my most vulnerable, I told them, when I could offer nothing in return, you were there, Tyson. Not because you wanted something from me, but because you cared. He shook his head, clearly overwhelmed. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "But that's just it," I insisted. "No one else did. Not even my own daughter." Maya, who had been processing the conversation in her methodical way, spoke up. "Does this mean we would live here after you're gone?" I smiled at her directness. "Yes, Maya, but I hope that won't be for many years yet. In the meantime, I was hoping we might become more of a family." I explained my proposal, that they consider moving into the house now, not as employees or tenants, but as companions. The house had 4 bedrooms. We could each have our privacy while sharing the common spaces. Maya could have a real garden to study her botanical mathematics, I said, referring to a project she'd enthusiastically described over dinner. "And, Tyson, you wouldn't have to commute here every day. We couldn't possibly—" Tyson began. "Please," I interrupted gently. "Don't answer right away. Think about it. Discuss it between yourselves. This isn't charity, and it's not an impulsive decision. It's what I want." I didn't tell them about Celine's reaction when I'd informed her of my decision the previous week. Her initial disbelief had quickly given way to fury. She'd threatened legal action, accused me of mental instability, even suggested that Tyson had somehow manipulated or coerced me. "He's after your money," she'd spat, unable to conceive of a relationship not based on exploitation. "He's been playing you for years." Her allegations said more about her worldview than Tyson's character. In her mind, people only showed kindness when they wanted something in return, because that was how she operated. When I calmly informed her that the will had been properly executed, with my mental competence verified by 2 independent physicians, her tactics had shifted from anger to bargaining. "What do I need to do to change your mind?" she'd asked, her voice suddenly sweet. "We can visit more often. The kids miss you." The transparency of her manipulation was almost sad. She still didn't understand that this wasn't about punishing her or forcing her to behave differently. It was about recognizing and honoring genuine care. "This isn't a negotiation, Celine," I'd told her. "It's a decision I've made after careful consideration." In the end, she'd stormed out, declaring she was done with me. It had hurt, yes, but not as deeply as it once would have. The pain was cushioned by the knowledge that I was finally living authentically, honoring my own worth rather than constantly seeking approval I would never receive. Now, sitting with Tyson and Maya, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever they decided about my offer to share the house, I knew my legacy would be in good hands. A week later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Tyson and Maya standing on the porch, each holding a small suitcase. "We'd like to accept your offer," Tyson said simply. "If it still stands." It did. That evening, the three of us sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the garden in golden light. Maya was inside, already rearranging her new bedroom to accommodate her books and calculators. "You've given us an incredible gift," Tyson said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you." I shook my head. "You already have, many times over. You saw me when I was invisible to my own family. You treated me with dignity when others saw only my usefulness." He was silent for a moment, contemplating the garden. "You know," he said finally, "the most beautiful gardens are the ones where each plant has room to grow, where nothing is choked out or overshadowed." I smiled, understanding his metaphor. "And where the gardener values each flower for what it is, not what he wishes it would be." Exactly. As the light faded and the first stars appeared overhead, I felt a profound sense of peace. My journey hadn't been easy. The pain of Celine's rejection, of realizing that my own child saw me as nothing more than a resource to be used, would never fully disappear. But I had found something precious in its place: authentic connection, mutual respect, and the freedom to be valued for who I was, not what I could provide. The useless old woman had discovered her worth. And in doing so, she had created a legacy of love that would flourish long after she was gone, like perennials returning season after season in a well-tended garden. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.